for not paying its crew. The condition of the ship was disgusting. There was virtually no food on board, and this sort of occurrence is becoming more common as the use of foreign ships increases and as Australian flagged and crewed coastal shipping is subject to further pressure, diminishing support and regulatory neglect. If it goes unaddressed, this trend will weaken both our economic sufficiency and our national security, and it will reduce our capacity to respond to humanitarian emergencies in our region. As the Shadow Minister for Infrastructure, the member for Grain, mentioned quite rightly, it's also likely that such changes will put us at greater risk of major environmental disaster. It's also relevant, Deputy Speaker, in considering the security of our ports, to question the blind haste with which these vital pieces of infrastructure are being sold off. Rod Sims, the Chair of the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, has been openly critical of such asset sales, pointing out that when states seek to maximise asset prices for ports, they are laying the ground for inevitable freight price increases, which in turn flow through the entire economy. State governments obviously have an interest in maximising those prices. I know in Western Australia they have a particular interest because the Barnett government wants to cover its quite considerable blushes in relation to nearly $40 billion worth of state debt. But it needs to be remembered that if you max out those asset prices on sale, a private operator has to recoup those funds, and it does so through freight prices, and freight prices flow into everything. Mr Sims has been particularly critical of the proposal that a private operator in Fremantle would be given the contractual opportunity to control the development of the outer harbour in future. And in another article from September, Kenneth Davidson listed a number of critical views from people with long experience of port operations. While deploring the sale of the Port of Melbourne, former Ports boss Michael Friedrich said, and I quote, "I've always operated on the premise that ports are vital to the development of countries and should play a supporting role to the rest of the economy." John Lyons, the Managing Director of ANL, said in the same article, and I quote, "We remain opposed to the privatisation of state monopoly ports. Port and other state asset privatisation are taxes by stealth, which will be paid for in decades to come." And I think that's an important point. They are taxes by stealth. You take a monopoly asset, you sell it into private hands, you get no competitive benefits, and the pricing approach that a private operator takes in the interest of maximising profit, which is their primary interest, flows through into the general economy. It is a tax by stealth, and you can't argue against taxes and the influence of taxes and give away private monopoly infrastructure when you know that that will be one of the economic consequences. The reality is that the privatisation of Fremantle Port as Part 2 or Part 3 or Part 5, it's hard to tell, of the crazy plan to create a privately operated toll road in the form of the so-called Perth Freight Link would achieve the privatisation of our future in Fremantle and of the South Metro region of Perth. Port assets and their landside links should be controlled, planned, delivered, adjusted over time in the broad public interest, and when they're subject to the commercial interest of a private owner in the case of a privatised port or a private owner in the case of a privately operated toll road, we as citizens give away the opportunity to have those critical assets regulated and controlled in the broad interest. One of the things that people in Western Australia haven't cottoned onto sufficiently is that if we see the Perth Freight Link become a privately operated toll road, it will inevitably involve concession deeds as part of that contractual arrangement. Those concession deeds will be given so that the private operator of the toll road has confidence about their revenues into the future, and that will stop a future state government from being able to introduce public infrastructure of that kind. Deputy Speaker, the reality is that Australia's strongest economic and strategic position is one in which our ports are administered and developed in the broad public interest, and that requires public ownership. It's a scenario in which coastal shipping should be supported and maintained as a vital transport capacity involving, more than anything else, Australian ships and Australian seafarers.
The debate is interrupted in accordance